but we're up here with our mugs, and we promise not to crack too many dad jokes, right? I think we'll try to avoid that. Okay. But yeah, thank you for joining us. I'm Andy Zosel of Zebra Technologies. I'm joined today by Justin Griffith of StayLinked and Steve Rich of ADI. And these are a couple of our great partners here to talk about augmenting workers and gaining efficiency through incremental automation. And we'll talk a little bit about what that actually means to us later on. But I think when we've looked at the last few years, there's been a lot of advances in automation, and there's a lot of clever things we can do through automation. But it's still pretty clear that, as a flexible, deployable resource, human talent is still by far the most capable automation or task-oriented system. So what we like to talk about today is kind of the continuum between completely manual and wholly automated, and some of the ways you can go from that completely manual tasks into more automated, if not full dark warehouse type environments. We believe that automation should be flexible and accessible, and it should really augment the productivity of the team that you already have in place, kind of filter out those bottlenecks. So we've heard from many of our customers, that their predictability of their business, especially in the last few years, has decreased, and therefore trending out and being able to say, okay, I'm going to do a 7-year ROI on this major capital-intensive automation project is quite challenging. So we've been looking at ways that we can help our customers kind of reduce that time to ROI and improve kind of the accessibility of automation. If you look at kind of our research reports that we do as Zebra Technologies this kind of emphasizes what we're talking about. So we do this vision study, and here's a few examples of the data. This is around warehouse and automation. And what you see on this slide is that the less capital-intensive automation projects are ones that are really a focus area, and kind of adopting that crawl, walk, run approach. Beginning with small steps and creating the data and kind of real-time visibility into your processes that enables you to see where it makes sense to automate and where in your operation it can start. And of course, with these complex projects, it really is all about collaboration. And so if you look at kind of the next few slides of our vision study, you'll see that a lot of the focus is around specific areas of automation and where it can support you, but that typically takes a team activity. And that's why, rather than just do this by myself, we asked both StayLinked and ADI to join us here. So maybe I can just skip through some of these studies, and if you'd like to learn more about kind of our manufacturing and warehouse studies, you can find, there's a QR code there if you want to grab the information from the web. Just more surveying industry and best practice around automation in both the manufacturing and warehouse environments. But kind of in that context of taking a crawl, walk, run approach, maybe I'll open it up to our panel and start with the first question. I mean, do you guys have examples? Justin, maybe start with you around that.
I do. Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories this was actually the project that kicked off our innovation department. We started something called StayLinked Labs, and this was the project that sort of kicked it off. So it's interesting specs for it. It was a flagship customer of ours. It was a common Zebra customer. They were nearing the holidays, and they had this edict, and I'm sure many of you have been in the situation where they said, you have to innovate. You absolutely have to improve on what you're doing. The only rule is you can't touch the WMS. You're not allowed to integrate anything. So whatever you do, you've got to overlay it on top of whatever you have today. And so they also couldn't get us the hardware. What they wanted to do was a conveyance system. That's what you're seeing on the right. But they couldn't get us the system because the ball bearings are custom made in Germany, and so they couldn't ship it to us. So what we had to do instead was we had to 3D print a small scale model of it, and using Zebra's hardware, we were able to replicate all the same APIs and triggers that the application would need to give us and use for the automated system. So we're a terminal emulation software. That's a very, very old technology, but it still represents the grand majority of the use case in most warehouses today. It's about a 2/3 chance that if you're operating in a warehouse, you're running terminal emulation. It's also a very difficult system to integrate with. So by using the terminal emulation as an instruction language, we proved out on 3D printed stuff. 3 weeks later, they were able to deploy at full scale in the warehouse. So that's probably my favorite example. The WMS system had no idea any of that is going on. They were totally uninvolved. And I think that's when we talk about these sort of incremental steps that you take. These are the wins that are out there. These are the opportunities that are out there. If you have a flexible system and you have partners who know what they're doing, there's all sorts of opportunities for things like this. So that one's probably my favorite.
That's great, Justin. Yeah, and you really were able to help the customer out with some severe constraints and bridge to automation. Steve, what about you? Do you have some good examples of kind of crawl, walk, run?
Yeah, I think we see that with most customers. I mean, a lot of them are a little bit risk adverse, which makes sense. A lot of automation is going into a operation that's key in their system, so they don't want to put something in, have any kind of issues, have to backtrack. So one of the things we like to do really is work with the customer to come up with a prototype system or first article system to really prove it out. A lot of times we'll do factory acceptance testing in-house before deploying it. And obviously everybody goes through a test protocol on that and make sure that it's proven before we go and deploy. One of the other things we really try to push our partners to is like start simple, don't jump right in. You can spend a lot of money trying to automate the 100% of it. Mm-hmm. You can scale that back a little bit for a fraction of the cost, oftentimes hit the 80% mark. But really keep it simple, try to get that first win internally, build some momentum, and get some confidence in automation and grow from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Steve. So Justin, you talked a little bit about your integrating with a fixed WMS. I mean, obviously, these days, warehouse operations can be quite complex with a lot of IT systems, OT systems, and people and whatnot. What approaches do you help with that kind of integration and successful implementation?
I think maybe the most important thing that you go into a project with is appreciate the full scale of risk mitigation. For many years, technology was talked about in this industry like there was a character defect, how risk adverse the industry could be. And I think what we've discovered too, or the rest of society has kind of discovered, is that that's part of the job. Risk mitigation is part of the job. There's a number that has to go and be hit while you're innovating, right? And we like to sort of think of it this way. Most companies are not logistics companies. Most companies have a logistics operation supporting what they actually do. If you make bolts for bridges, you aren't on the upper edge of what logistics is capable of doing technology-wise. So it's important to remember sort of where a customer is coming from, right? If you go in with a technology proposition and you say, and all you have to do to get this great technology is upgrade your WMS. That's it. That's like saying to a customer, all you have to do to get this new technology is open heart surgery. That's it. Right? No big deal, right? So I think that's a very important thing to remember is, as Steve was saying, start small, baby steps, focus on using platforms that allow you to not just start at baby steps, but allow you to scale up to something much larger, right? That's almost the more important thing that I think a lot of the people in the room are sort of focused on, is pick technology platforms that not only give you the option to start small, but also aren't painting you into a corner when you want to go bigger, once you've got the momentum, once you've got the wins.
That makes sense.
Okay, so Andy, let me ask you a bit, because Zebra made a lot of investments in machine vision and fixed scanning a bit. How do you guys compare to some of the other players in there when we're talking about efficiency in a warehouse operation?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, technology obviously integrated into these systems. So I think the first thing we're trying to do from a development perspective is make that technology approachable, right? Like make the first user interface and the experience with that technology as easy to use as possible. And not compromise ease of use with what you're talking about, like future-proofing and making it scalable. So a lot of examples, we've made smart cameras and smart cameras that can read barcodes, but then smart cameras that can also do a variety of other tasks as you kind of license or upgrade them. There's a lot of other applications where our partners have taken our portfolio of cameras and fixed readers and paired them with our mobile computers to share that data across both kind of the automation system and into the human element. So you can really start to leverage both the automation, but the automation with the people. So if you can imagine you're scanning a bunch of boxes automatically, it's great to have that visibility for the person who's managing or supporting that line for exceptions, to have that visibility of what's happening with the automation. So Zebra has that kind of ability to connect not only the IT and OT pieces together, but also connect that to the people in that environment. And I think, Steve, we were talking earlier about different ways that automation can contribute, kind of that flexibility, scalability piece. Are there, solutions, examples that you can give that help your customers with that?
Yeah, so I think automation really should be nimble and scalable. So business models change sometimes quarterly. You can be running a high volume of a product one quarter, next quarter demand's down, so you need to really shift that. So I think it's key that the automation follows those trends and you have the ability to do that. So that's where I think modular robot cells or modular automation or AMRs really play into that, because you can scale up a system, scale down a system. If you're a company that has different locations, you may want to send some automation, transport it to another building even. So I think really when you're designing an automated solution, you need to have the ability to make it very flexible.
Yeah, we were talking last night about a retail customer that would maybe have a team win in a certain region, all of a sudden, boom, all their sales expand, and so they need to flex that automation.
Yeah, so, you're not going to throw a sorter on the back of a trailer, but you can throw some AMRs on a trailer
there you go.
And get it to a different facility.
Yeah. So. Great. And Justin, you mentioned earlier kind of risk mitigation and one of the keys to successful deployment is mitigating risk. So do you have any more thoughts around that?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of risk to a warehouse and sort of where automation can help with that. And I think some of them are very obvious where automation can help. You have a lack of workforce in some areas, in some cases, right? You have a high turnover in some cases. You have worker safety, right? Or wear and tear. And these are great opportunities, obviously, for automation to step in, right? But I think one of the things that when you start pursuing automation, there's some not so obvious things related more to the environment that are definitely worth looking at. I'll call it, sort of wrap it up in sort of hygiene, right? The type of environment that can kind of consume an automated system. It might mean that the warehouse gets a little more orderly, which is good for the warehouse in aggregate, right? That's a good idea. Like we did our own study on connectivity, right? On just on pure play warehouse connectivity to see if that was still a problem. And because it's very relevant to terminal emulation, the connectivity in a warehouse. What we found was that it's still one of the largest issues in the warehouse. It's still one of the biggest risks to all technology you're trying to implement in a warehouse environment. So for a warehouse of about 50 users, it represents about $400,000 a year of lost productivity to have connectivity issues. To put that to scale, that's about the equivalent of licensing a brand new cloud-based WMS and refreshing all of your mobile devices every year for that same number of users. So play the game of scale, right? Any larger than that, and the numbers get so big, they're not helpful, right? They're just so big, they're not believable. So I think that's one of the approaches that we sort of look at taking, is address some of the underlying issues, because they will give you a truer reflection of anything else that you're trying to implement in the warehouse. It won't be dragged on by these environmental issues that would be dragging on any technology implementation and sort of wrapped up in any of the automation initiatives that you have.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely is good practice to understand the environment, understand what you're trying to accomplish, and make sure you know what baseline you're starting with, right? And I think, there's not only the physical assets and the digital assets, but then there's the whole people side and the culture management, and
Totally.
and obviously, like we talked about up front, one of the most important parts of the operation is the actual warehouse workers and the talent in the warehouse. Steve, when you have implemented a lot of automation projects over your career, how do you create automation that like empowers them or makes them feel like it's part of the solution rather than just replacing or intimidated by the automation?
Yeah, I think that's crucial when you're putting in any sort of automation. So historically, I think a lot of people look at automation as a way to reduce headcount, right? I think traditionally that's what everybody tries to focus on.
Yeah.
I think maybe we've seen a little bit of a shift though with automation as being more there to aid the operators and to get rid of the repetitive tasks that they may be doing over and over again, or lifting heavy cases to build a pallet over and over again.
Right.
So it's to improve the operator efficiency. I think make it a little bit easier on them, but then also you can allow the operators to partake in different tasks. So if you have a robot per se lifting and moving, then you can have the operator doing some other tasks that some sort of automation can't do. I think earlier I talked about automating the 100% where it gets expensive. Humans still have that edge with some tasks where it's going to cost a lot to automate, but a person can do it.
So you look for kind of those more repeatable tasks, the 80-20 type of rule almost in that automation.
Yeah, I think you really want to get rid of the repetition if you can. So I know, just to take it one step further, I know like we do a lot of automation audits with customers. I'm going to do one tomorrow morning. So what we'll see is when we're walking through, you usually get the operator staring at the group of operations managers or engineers walking through, wondering, oh great, what are they going to replace me with? So I think what we really want to do is bring the operators into those discussions though, because when you're putting automation in, there's some nuance to the tasks that you may not be seeing that the operator can do or needs to do. But I think it also allows the operator to feel like part of that decision, and they'll be less likely to go up against the automation. They'll want to champion that a little bit more. So I think one of the key things to get to the point is really bring them into the conversation, make them feel part of the change, and not be afraid of the automation.
Yeah, that's great. So we've been working with ADI on a different set of kind of AMR technologies. So it's been an exciting kind of journey that we've been on together in some of the use case and applications.
Yeah, so Andy, I know recently Zebra's launched their fulfillment application for the AMRs, which I think is going to be a real game changer.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to go into a little bit of detail on that.
Yeah, I think for us, again, back to your saying about kind of augmenting, getting the worker involved, traditionally we've seen, a lot of systems in AMRs, there's some confusion about where the worker should be, about where the robots are, so we introduced this concept earlier this year called team intelligence, where basically it's looking at both guiding the actual worker using wearables as well as guiding the robot and coordinating that activity together. So really optimizing kind of that work between both the worker and the mobile robot. And so every step is specifically planned, and there's a great coordination. Basically, a robot's waiting for the worker at each point in the process, and so it's like a team, and it's collaboration, not just randomness. And then the next step of that for us is all about not only maximizing the productivity and the utilization of the people talent, but also the robots, right? Like robots we know are expensive. Typically a pretty expensive investment by our customers, and we want to make sure our customers get maximum utilization of those robots. So we're really excited about some of the developments we're working on there around maximizing robot utilization and whatnot that will be launching next year. It's an exciting time, I think, in general in the automation industry, and the the kind of putting the power back into the warehouse operator's hands to have the flexibility to deal with the kind of the up and down and the put and take, like you say, that flexible level of automation through AMRs, work cells, and connectivity into existing systems that you guys provide. So, I mean, going back to kind of integrating into existing systems, do you have any other examples, Justin, that you wanted to share with the group here?
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting to sort of get a scale on, we focus very much on legacy systems. So just to give you an example of the scale of what that issue can be like. So if we have some data, these were two articles that were released 1 month apart. And I think it's an interesting thing. This is talking about, this is just one type of system, right? This is the IBM mainframe computer, which is one of the oldest computing platforms in active use today. And it runs a programming language called COBOL. And everybody remembers COBOL from Y2K, and it was impossible to find programmers and planes were going to fall out of the sky. Right, so that problem never went away, right? The estimate was that in a span of a couple of years, it went from 200 million lines of code, or I'm sorry, 200 billion lines of code written in COBOL to 800 billion lines of code. Now, IBM just announced an AI to be able to help people convert these legacy apps into a different language, right? But say we give it a 5-year lead time before the model is really useful. By then it will be 2.5 trillion lines of code that it will have to work its way through, right? So that's a scale of kind of the issue that we see is we have a lot of these customers who have legacy systems that are deeply, deeply entrenched in whatever they've been running on that could be decades old. So one example we had was a wine distribution company. They were running a now defunct WMS. There were no updates that they could do to the system. The programmers were long retired, the system was retired. So the only option they had for integrating was anything they could overlay. So they bought, for example, forklifts with self-driving capability. But they were on a waiting list for integration because they needed to find somebody who spoke a dead language, somebody who could program in Latin, right? Mm-hmm. And it was never going to happen. So what we were able to do was, again, use that kind of overlay mentality. We used the terminal emulation data to extract where the self-driving forklifts were supposed to go and then feed that data to the system. And this is another perfect example. The data is actually there. You're using it today. The instructions for a lot of the first steps that you could take into automation actually already exist in the system today. And when you're working with flexible platforms and good partners, it's actually pretty simple to take the first steps and see whether that works for you, see whether it's worth continuing to pursue, all without having to start with open heart surgery and a big WMS upgrade. Right?
Awesome. Yeah, that's great to see that those solutions are available, right? Because it could easily just say, okay, can't make it work, right? And like you say, business is definitely getting more complex, more SKUs, more throughput, et cetera, than less. And yeah, you still have to live with some of the systems in that case. I think, Steve, you've done a lot of automation deployments over your career, and the industry has certainly evolved, especially in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, but what do you see as kind of the major future trends in automation? And maybe after you answer this, I'll open it to the audience. They can ask us some questions.
Yeah, so I see two major trends. One's a continuing trend, and that is lack of labor. Mm-hmm. So I think everybody's seen that the last few years. I think that's going to really continue. What that means for businesses is really focus on the automation that can get you the quick win and supplement the lack of labor that you have. So maybe come up with automation that you can have an operator work several cells, or if you only have one person, give them the tools to get more throughput out, and not necessarily focus on getting automation just to get it, right? You want to really maximize the number of operators to make the throughputs work.
Got it. Yeah.
One of the other trends that I see, and I think this is more prevalent over in Europe, but it's going to be shifting here to the U.S., is sustainability. I think we're going to probably see that go from less of a catchphrase and more of a law, really, because I think over in Europe they're starting to put that into law. So I think over here what we're going to see is a need to focus on sustainable materials in your packaging, where you can remove plastics. But also a big part of that is right-size packaging. Shipping costs are expensive. I think as far as really trying to shrink down what you're putting onto a truck, I think that's going to be pretty critical here moving forward. There's a lot of right-size packaging companies out there that have really good systems. What I see happening is really tying AMRs or other automation into a right-size packaging machine to get a perfect size box over to, say, an auto store workstation. So I think sustainability is really going to be something that I think is key here over the next few years.
Yeah, great. We've heard a lot of kind of good experience from these guys about, various dynamics in the market and projects they've seen. There's, like I say, a wealth of knowledge here with at least my two colleagues here on the panel, so definitely would like to open it up for questions if you have them. Does anyone have any questions in the room that we can answer about, automation trends, how to connect into various systems, what you're seeing across the industry? Anything from, yes, please, in front.
What made you look into connectivity as an issue?
That's actually where we got the name, StayLinked. There's a weird, so terminal emulation speaks this language that was invented the year we put a man on the moon. So it doesn't deal well with network interruptions and stuff, and that was one of the things that we solved with our software. But then it later sort of became kind of the mindset that we were using for attaching these technologies into legacy systems and stuff. But the connectivity thing had always been something we'd said as a company was a continued problem because the product that we made still had such high demand for it, but we never really quantified that. And then like last year, we decided, all right, let's just go for it. But it's a very, very tricky thing to isolate into because we had to actually interview the individual workers on the warehouse floor at a number of customers before we got real data back. Many customers actually blamed their users for the connectivity problems in the warehouse, or they blamed the mobile devices as the problem. And I'm sure many of you have been a part of this before, where the technology is kind of the fall guy for whatever was going on in the system before, right? So we really wanted to add strong data that would back that up, and it was just mind-blowing how expensive it is. By the time you have an interruption, you have a worker, and then you have their manager, and then you have the tech support, and then the IT person who has to get involved, times their pay rates, times how many times this happens per day. It just explodes so quick. And it's so solvable, right? And there are a lot of technology solutions that fix that very quickly, from more resilient devices with better Wi-Fi built in. There's simple moves that you could make even within a warehouse. It's just, again, part of the hygiene of keeping up on the warehouse operation that just wiped that. And then you're starting with an even baseline, so when you do anything on top of that, the foundation is really solid.
Yeah, that's great. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Question there?
I wanted to ask, when it comes to warehouse automation, it's often about cost reduction or optimization. I was wondering whether in your experience you also had the chance to look at the potential sustainability benefits, be it environmental benefits, or also social sustainability in terms of...
Totally.
Yeah. So I'll let Steve answer this. So the question, I think, just to repeat it, is, warehouse automation is mostly about cost reduction and kind of return on investment. What about the sustainability? You touched on it a little bit with the right size packaging. Maybe you can expand on your perspective on what customers are doing to achieve their sustainability goals by implementing automation.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it has to do with the amount that we're shipping, especially nowadays. We have a lot of e-commerce, 3PL companies that are shipping and receiving tons and tons of boxes or tons and tons of polybags products every day. So I think really that's an easy win. I think in sustainability is really what the packaging materials are and how big the packages themselves are. I mean, I've gotten boxes of Cheerios in a box this big. That doesn't do much for sustainability. So really, I think that's probably one of the biggest, easiest wins right now, I think. As far as automation throughout a building, I mean, you're still going to be using power. I mean, you can maybe streamline some processes, but I think that's probably the easiest win right now.
Yeah, and I think, utilizing your existing assets and optimizing those, is a really key, right? Like if you can get maximum utilization, then you're not kind of overbuying on automation and whatnot. Did you have anything you wanted to contribute to that, Justin?
No, I was just thinking this is one, first of all, it is totally undersold what automating the suckiest part of the job can do for retaining workforce. Honestly, if you can automate the piece that is the most costly, you were talking about sort of the social benefit of that, right? And for a while, we were having a conversation about the next generation of workforce coming in, and there kind of wasn't a lot of talk about the generation that you have that is getting older. So if you can automate things like pushing a really heavy cart across the warehouse, that means that you can retain more workforce, or you can recruit in a different workforce than you might be able to otherwise. I think that's one of the things that gets totally undersold about automation, is who you can enable just by virtue of the installation of it.
Yeah. Well, I think we're close to that time. Maybe one or two questions from the audience. Yeah.
Okay, so this may get a little complicated to explain, but thank you first off for mentioning safety, because this is the first panel, first discussion I've had in this time.
Oh, good.
Everybody's mentioned safety, and that is a huge thing. So,
Yeah.
Good.
So, talking about the legacy systems that a lot of these places use, that don't want to upgrade their WMSs, we Conagra Foods partners with several WMS third-party locations that, even under their umbrella, they may be, operating under 5 to 7 different legacy WMSs
Right.
as they thought up these smaller things. Does the technology exist to say, okay, in order to do business with us, like all of these locations, apply certain labels or barcoding or anything like that, and it would, I guess it could be used amongst all of those, and the data be received into our location.
So you're talking about your supply chain and your different partners that are using different WMSs,
Right.
and how to, yeah.
But
Yeah.
are they?
But
Are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
So one, if that technology existed, believe me, you'd know about it, right? But there are standards that are coming forth, especially in the food industry, that are helping people move toward that. And a lot of that is around safety and traceability and reverse logistics and things like that, and recalls and things like that. What we're seeing is that a lot of the technology, sort of the next great wave of technology, is about the flexibility and the customizability around what each customer specifically does and how they do it. And then what gets transported between companies is sort of this unified language. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting ever closer, and you can see it now, even just in this panel. The customizability of the platforms and the integration that we're capable of doing now, I mean, it is leaps and bounds of even where we were 5 years ago. So it's coming, but again, that issue is so large, and the especially among legacy systems, how different and disparate they can be, even within the same company, even wearing the same hat.
Yeah.
It can be totally different. So the important thing is more about pick platforms that can sort of speak all the languages or sort of float above that. Use integration platforms or integration layers that sort of abstract you from having to get into the weeds of the WMS themselves.
Question here, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could maybe speak to automation technology in regards to maybe vendor and retailer relations. So for example, if I am a supplier and I'm committing to sending a retailer a certain amount of goods and I'm transmitting that through an ASN, let's say. If the ASN says that this logistic unit should have this many products, but when it gets to the retailer, it actually ends up being scanned in and has this many.
Yeah.
How do you leverage automation technology during the actual process in which you, for example, build logistic units, so that what you're sending, what you're committing to send, is actually what you're physically sending?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So the question's around, the relationship between the vendor and the end user, and how do you kind of validate that what you've sent and what you use. I think, from our perspective, there's a huge boom in the number of applications that you can solve with machine vision and AI. So there's a lot of opportunities in that.
Totally.
And once you get to a point where you have some level of kind of real-time visibility of your processes and your products, leverage camera technology, you can start to store some more clear traceability. But I think you guys have done a few different machine vision projects and scanning projects. Have you seen specific examples of that deployed?
Yeah, so I think you can take that so far. I mean, really the data in is only as good as the data comes out, or vice versa, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But really, if you have human elements in there that are loading a truck, it's hard to kind of automate that out unless you're doing automated truck loading,
yeah,
where you can scan something and then it loads it into the truck.
Mm-hmm.
Because then when you get to your vendor site then and they're unloading it, it may vary slightly. So that's a tough one. I know we've done it like legal for trade for product sizes for postal agencies.
Mm-hmm.
You can do that because you can put like a specific scan tunnel in, dimensioner, scale, and then you basically certify it to an accuracy. So you can check product size, but product to quantify what's going on to a truck gets a little bit more tricky.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the great use cases, though, is sort of like he was talking about. We are also at this really key point in technology where you have a lot of convergence of technologies that would have been totally disparate. So machine vision talking to a handheld unit, where you have either the user loading or something or the user receiving, you have the opportunity to validate with systems that know more than the user has access to, or is talking to systems that are not integrated to each other, right? So the machine vision might be talking to something else that can, through the technology speaking to each other, alert in a way that you never had to integrate those two systems to have happen. And I hold that automation is not just about, robots and conveyors and stuff. It's anything that happened automatically that you didn't have to do yourself, right? So that's a beautiful example of the data's there. It may not require an integration. It might just take the right technology that can speak to each other.
Yeah, and we're seeing a nice adoption of RFID from that perspective. It's been around for a long time, but obviously once you have RFID, either on the pallet level, on the actual carton level, or even on the item level, you can get some level of kind of real-time visibility, and then a lot of kind of portal scanning and RFID type solutions, so you know actually what passed through any point, often a dock door and those type of applications. So yeah, we'd definitely like to work with you on those type of applications. Other questions from the room? Great questions so far. Really appreciate the feedback. So yeah, I think, between, machine vision, RFID, barcode still, other ways of gathering kind of real-time data about your operation, it really helps you to gain the visibility of seeing, okay, where can you deploy automation in a logical, accessible way. And then, there's a lot of automation technologies, even, AMRs or cells, like Steve was mentioning, and then the way to connect all those systems together, even if you are constrained. There have been, solutions like StayLinked and Justin mentioned. So it's an exciting time from that perspective. Our hope is that, your opportunity will be to implement systems as you kind of get out of firefighting mode of the last couple of years and actually look at, how do you increase your efficiency and productivity and meet things like sustainability and employee retention piece. So we'd love to work with you guys on that if there's any possibility of that. And of course, the session, we want your feedback as well. So I think is it on the app or on the app? There's a rating of the sessions, so you can tell us to not come back, or you can tell us that we covered some of the topics you like or whatever. And I really appreciate the time. Thank you.